There are a few Netflix shows that carried as much baggage before its release as The Three Body Problem. Adapted from the globally renowned and very famous sci-fi novels of the same name, we have Game of Thrones writers D.B. Weiss and David Benioff adapting into a thrilling sci-fi adventure on Netflix. But you can imagine, again, given what's happened with, their previous work, aka Game of Thrones, season 8's finale left, probably the most disgruntled viewers in probably international history. So naturally, when they were coming in to decide to do something as massive as the Three Body Problem with even more cinematic, bigger moments than a fantasy show would have because of the natural CGI effects needed for such a big undertaking of a hard sci-fi adaptation, you can imagine that many of us were concerned and intrigued at the same time to come back in a very big way. Fans wanted another Expanse. And for me, The Expanse is one of the greatest adaptations from a book series put into television in a very long time. It's on Prime Video, and I'm happy to get into that in a different video at a different time. But again, The Expanse is a really good example of combining a lot of hard sci-fi and, space opera elements into a really well done show. For me, instead, I think we got something a little bit different. I definitely think this is more accessible than the books themselves. It's definitely more visually ambitious than I was expecting, but it's also more uneven than I think I'd like for especially the first season. For many, this was very bold and fascinating, and truly it is. And for others, all across the internet, it's also a disappointment. And the real question for me is, can the season 2 really rise to the occasion to actually cement it as a fantastic television show, or will it not meet expectations and unfortunately lead to a cancellation? The story starts in China during the Cultural Revolution, with a moment of betrayal and violence that sets humanity on its first contact with aliens. From there, the show mainly follows scientists in the present day as they begin to unravel an otherworldly mystery. There is a countdown in the sky, this strange VR game that magically shows up, and the question of who or what is out there. What makes the Three Body Problem different and exciting is that it's not about lasers and spaceships and this insane sense of impending doom with like alien first contact. It's a lot more about ideas. It's physics, it's mathematics, it's humanity's place in the universe, and wildly showing throughout the series how uncaring this universe really is. The VR sequences stand out visually. They're surreal, they're unsettling, they're filled with these interesting, intriguing puzzles, and strange yet familiar-ish landscapes by, in some cases, recreating some historical context, but with this sci-fi flair to it. They're metaphors for humanity trying to grasp at things that are bigger than itself. And while they don't fully capture the density and the intensity of the writing of the original novels, it still does a really good job of making the scope feel real. And hi, I'm Sage Patel, and I love all things science fiction and fantasy. I'm also author of a series called Tarek that combines a bit of both, and you should check it out below. Getting back to the Three Body Problem, we get a really good variety of perspective. We get scientists, we get soldiers, we get everyday people experiencing something strange. Their perspective adds layers to the mystery. But also because of this, on the other hand, I don't feel like one character truly dominates. And this does make the story feel sprawling, as there's going to be many continuations of specific characters, but also it's lacking kind of a focus. The acting is solid, but it's not necessarily remarkable. Performances are very competent, but I don't feel particularly gripped. Also, I didn't really feel that overall sense of dread during certain moments that I really was expecting to. In a show that leans so heavily on the source material of it being philosophical, mathematical, and about the human experience, I think there just needed to be a little bit elevated form in the writing itself to really get us to that point where we're all like on our, just edge of our seat waiting to see what's going to happen next. Strong characterization overall could have elevated the material. And I think unfairly, or maybe fairly, I'm comparing this to The Expanse, where even the minor characters felt very alive throughout the entire series, versus here the ensemble sort of kind of blends together when they sort of shouldn't. And it doesn't make it bad. By no stretch am I saying this is bad. But the show does lean more on concept than personality. And to be fair, there is an element of that in the book, so perhaps it's a replicate, like a good comparison. But at the end of the day, when you're converting something like books into adapted media, I think there is a degree that needs to be translated that gets us a little bit more to the point in the gripping sense of things. And of course, at its core, the Three Body Problem is about science and really hard fundamental science. When you see in the show what the Three Body Problem is about, you're like, oh wow, that is vastly inconceivable to what I thought it would probably be for the average non-sci-fi reading audience. And for those who are reading sci-fi novels, it's still extremely intriguing because it is a very unique premise as to why that's happening and what is going on with this alien civilization that is contacting us. And for those who are unfamiliar, let me just clarify this. Hard sci-fi is science fiction rooted in actual physics. They literally use the mathematical theories that are prevalent today, and they combine it with the scientific findings we know and what we think could be scientific theory put into the future. And that's what makes the novels very legendary for its approach. They weave particle physics, cosmology, and like actual complex math into the drama itself, making the science part of the narrative tension. And the show does translate some of this really, really well. The collapsing particle accelerator, the countdown, the VR sets, but also sands off the edges of accessibility. Some fans loved that choice and saying that it made it very approachable, and I agree. I do think there is a degree of approachability to make a show successful, to make the audience just understand things a lot faster than like the complexity of this book. And it is more complex than I'd say like 90 other percent of things I've ever read for sci-fi. And then others felt betrayed for the same reason I just mentioned, that they felt that, not belittling, but simplifying the science really just took away from the magic of the books themselves. But again, I do think when you're converting into a mass market audience, that element of the hard science is just not going to necessarily work for the majority of people who are just trying to watch and enjoy a television show. Okay, and here's the big elephant in the room. The Game of Thrones writers themselves. After the rushed, very fast, and unsatisfying ending of the world's favorite show, I think people did not trust them to then take on something as innovative as this. Fans were worried they would do the exact same thing to another renowned masterpiece, which, again, rightfully so. But in all honesty, in some ways, I think they did better for an adaptation than I would have expected. And I mean that sincerely. The show looks expensive, the pacing is careful, and the bones of the story are more importantly still intact. But in other ways, the critics also felt very just detached, which some of it I think is fair, some of it I think is completely unfair. The plot lines are streamlined for a reason. Again, this is a conversion from novel to to visual media. Characters are simplified, and then certain plot lines are just 100% faster, but in some cases might feel a little untouched. Or rather, some arcs feel a little rushed or undercooked. Readers of the novels notice the shortcuts, and the philosophical density is a lot harder to find on screen. And I think that that's what makes this such an ambitious project. And I think there had to be some, degree of reality that existed when filming this, primarily around like the use and the tying into a lot of the Chinese history and underpinnings of what makes the start of the series what it is. And because of that, there is some sensitivity and nuance to it, right? Of course, like it's like, does a Western adaptation really make sense to do it justice in the way that the novel should originally have been done? Like, I'm not saying it needed to be Chinese, directors, writers, etc. for everything for it, but I mean, I think that is one of the drawbacks I think that some people were initially thinking. And again, this is for me to say, I don't think this fails at all. I just think it's a very bold adaptation, and because it's such a big project, I think that's why I'm a little bit more skeptic of the end product that I've seen so far. If you loved the books, this probably isn't going to do it for you ultimately. If you wanted more accuracy, if you wanted more rigor, you just weren't going to get that out of a television show, especially one that's going to be mass appeal on Netflix, right? The show's weaknesses go beyond adaptation choices. The tone feels a little uneven throughout. It's part mystery, part thriller, part selective drama. The pacing sometimes drags, and sometimes the pacing is a little too fast for certain elements. And while the VR sequences are imaginative, aren't quite there for certain elements of it. I've been going back and forth with this about the ensemble, because the ensemble kind of also lingers. There's no central character that pulls it all together, and then ultimately it just feels like a collective as opposed to like, one or two people I think whose storylines are really that were pushing things forward rather. And I think ultimately I'm siding on the side where I think it still needs time for things to be fleshed out, and it's good that everything was kind of even for now. Visually, the show looked extremely expensive, but it didn't feel immersive. But I also am not putting that all on them and the show. I think it's also as a result of, I think Netflix, when they do sci-fi shows, don't do it as to the highest quality as you do see on Apple TV, for example, when it comes to any of their sci-fi adaptations. I think the three body problem needs a little bit of time to get grounded into the reality that we're putting forward. And I think I'm really hoping that the next season will actually show some really grand visuals that tie it together to make it feel like, whoa. And I think that's what I want out of this show. So I'm very cautiously optimistic. And getting into that, the ending, although without getting into spoilers or anything, it works. It actually does set the stage for something darker, bolder, more creative, more interesting, and putting us like a step further into figuring out humanity versus aliens. And I'm genuinely curious again to see season 2. Like, I think there is potential. And here's the truth. Like everybody else who cares about these things, I think there's two options, right? If season 2 rises to the challenge and specifically leans harder into the science, it sharpens the characters, and it reflects the depth of the books, I'll keep watching. If not, I think I'll probably end up stepping away. Because as bold as it is, the three body problem is not immune to Netflix's track record. One bad season can sink it, just like we've seen before in other shows. So where does this land? For me, the three body problem is fun but flawed. It's bold, ambitious, and at times very fascinating. But it's also uneven, simplified, and not as remarkable as it could have been. If you haven't read the books, I actually recommend you not reading them first. You'll find the show way more unique, more ambitious, more exciting, definitely something unlike anything you've seen before in terms of premise. If you have read the books, you may feel a little let down, but hopefully you still at least feel curious enough to see what could the second season bring. Either way, it's an ambitious first contact story that definitely deserves attention. Just don't expect it to be the next Expanse, or rather, not yet. This is Sage and Sorcery, and the three body problem is Netflix swinging for the fences. Bold, flawed, fascinating, but not the masterpiece it could be. I'm hopeful for season 2, but cautious. Because with hard sci-fi, you either rise to the occasion, or you collapse under the weight of your own ambition.